Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. You know, President Trump does more talking than any president I've ever seen. I mean, he's on TV more than I am, and I host an actual TV show. 5 days a week, he's got the makeup on and the cameras are rolling. Today, he talked for half an hour at an award ceremony for the Naval Academy football team. He talks a lot. But if you listen to him, you might notice what he almost never talks about. And it's weird because he's a Republican, and they usually love talking about freedom. Not Trump. Never really talks about freedom or liberty. I mean, sure, he does use the words, like, for instance, last week, he signed the executive order on water pressure. He said it is to, quote, restore shower freedom. So you get a lot of that, shower freedom. But you never really hear him talk about freedom and liberty in any meaningful way, like as the ideals this country was supposedly built upon. And it's because those ideals are just not meaningful at all to Trump. He doesn't really even care for freedom, not for other people, for sure. If anything has been brought into very sharp focus in these first 85 days, particularly in just the last 24 hours, it is that Donald Trump is acting as an enemy of freedom. His administration is working to take away the liberties at the core of the American experiment. He's waging an assault on freedom and liberty in almost any sphere he can. In a couple of months, we have become a country where people are just being grabbed off the street, accused of crimes, and then sent to a foreign gulag without any American freedom stuff like due process or evidence or even charges. The most egregious, chilling example, of course, is that of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who first came to the U.S. in 2011 as an undocumented 16-year-old sent by his mother because he had been pressured to join a violent gang in his native El Salvador. In 2019, you'll recall that was during the first Trump administration, an immigration judge gave Garcia a protected immigration status, saying his life would be in danger if he were forced to return to El Salvador. And since then, Garcia has lived and worked here legally. He married an American woman. They started a family together in Maryland. Last month, after picking up his 5-year-old son who has special needs, Garcia was grabbed by ICE. And then within days, they had shipped Garcia off to CICOT, the Salvadoran gulag, along with hundreds of others caught in Trump's roundup. Now, he's never been charged with any crime. ICE has maintained he's a member of the MS-13 gang, but they've offered no proof in any court. He and his family says he has no ties to any gang. And that family, left to wonder now, will they ever see him again?
I will not stop fighting until I see my husband alive. Kilmar, if you can hear me, stay strong. God hasn't forgotten about you. Our children are asking, when would you come home? And I pray for the day I tell them the time and date that you'll return.
Close your eyes and listen to that tape, and it sounds like a woman whose husband's been taken hostage, begging the kidnappers to show mercy. An American woman, an American family. In fact, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was also an apprentice in the American building trades. This was his American Union president last week.
You want to build a $5 billion data center? Want more six-figure careers with health care retirement and no college debt? You don't call Elon Musk. You call us. North America's building trade unions. And yeah, that means all of us, including our brother, smart apprentice, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who we demand to be returned to us and his family now. Bring him home.
All of us. In a U.S. District Court today in Maryland, Judge Paula Zinnes wanted to know what, if anything, the government was doing to bring him home, pursuant to the order from the Supreme Court, right, requiring the government to facilitate his release from that prison in El Salvador. And the government's answer is, it's El Salvador's problem now. Zinnes was not buying that and has tonight ordered depositions of 4 high-ranking Homeland Security officials. She says holding Trump officials in contempt is not off the table. Now, we don't know what's going to happen here. It's not at all clear the Trump administration will comply. They haven't so far. They seem full speed ahead on expanding this obviously illegal and unconstitutional operation. In fact, as we all heard yesterday, the Trump administration is quite openly talking about sending American citizens to the overseas gulag. The homegrowns, Trump called them yesterday, American citizens.
Is that legal to do? Is that something you're allowed to do?
Well, Jesse, these are Americans who he is saying who have committed the most heinous crimes in our country. And crime is going to decrease dramatically because he has given us a directive to make America safe again.
Well, the short answer is no, it's not something you're allowed to do. That's the Attorney General of the United States. Is that something you're allowed to do? Well, it depends on who's allowing it, right? Are you allowed to do that? Well, you're not by the Constitution. What's happening here, particularly with these renderings to this sort of third state gulag, right, is I have to say already the most egregious assault on personal liberty that I've seen in my American political life. I mean, in my lifetime, it's not really even that close. I mean, Guantanamo was really bad, but again, Guantanamo was plausibly part of the American judicial system, right? This is intentionally outside the orbit of our laws. And it's just part of the effort to dominate every single independent aspect of American life, a sort of full spectrum assault on American liberty. All sorts of institutions, free.
And joining us now is Rina Gandhi, one of the attorneys representing Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador. Thank you for joining us. I first want to ask you, your team says the government is not complying with the court's order. We watched that whole event yesterday with the president of El Salvador and President Trump. There was a lot said. Some of it seemed to be potentially helpful to you. Some of it maybe less so. What role do you think that exchange is going to have later today when you and your team go before a district judge not too far from here in Maryland to order for Abrego Garcia's release?
Yes, thank you, Christina, for having me. It's correct that the government has yet to produce any evidence of its actions, any evidence of a request being made to ask the government of El Salvador to release Mr. Abrego Garcia. I think as we all heard in those statements yesterday, the government of El Salvador is stating, or the president of El Salvador is stating that he will not smuggle Mr. Abrego Garcia into the United States, which of course is not the ask that we're making. I do believe that the ask is yet to be made, and that is something that will come up at the hearing.
But considering the president of the United States was sitting, 4 or 5 feet from the president of El Salvador and was even asked about it and did not ask about your client, is that something you plan on mentioning in court?
I can't speak to our strategies for court this afternoon. However, it is not a secret. I think we've all seen that video, certainly read over the statements that were made, and it's informative that that ask was not made.
I also want to ask you, both presidents yesterday, as well as some other administration officials, accused your client of being a criminal, an MS-13 gang member. You mentioned it a little bit, but have you seen any evidence at all to support those claims? Is there any truth, even in your client's past, that, we all changed, that maybe he did some things earlier in his life that they could be talking about? Or is there just, in your opinion, no evidence to support this whatsoever?
I would refer back to what the district court judge in this case said, which is the evidence presented doesn't show or doesn't lead one to believe that conclusion. At this time, no evidence has been submitted to support this allegation. And should we get what we're asking for, which is Mr. Abrego Garcia to return home, the government is welcome to introduce that evidence in a motion to reopen to litigate his withholding of removal grant. But at this time, what's relevant is that he was removed unlawfully and the government has made no actions to bring him back.
Can I also ask you, one of the other questions we've been asking each other, ourselves and officials, is how they're choosing these individuals. Do you know how your client got on their radar?
Absolutely not. Because quite frankly, my client should not have been on their radar. He was granted withholding of removal. That means that he is not allowed to be returned to the very place they've returned him to. How he ended up on this list, how he was, hunted down and stopped and taken, moved around the country and removed, I really can't tell you.
I also want to ask you, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen says he's ready to travel to El Salvador himself and push for your client's return to the U.S. But, what are the legal limits of what even you or a senator or anyone who is not the president of the United States can do to bring Abrego Garcia back because he is a non-citizen?
Yes, we welcome, everyone who's interested and cares about this family to continue caring about this family and stay interested. However, this is not the place or time for that type of action, given what the Supreme Court has ordered. The government is more than well positioned to take action in this case. And while we appreciate all the efforts that have been made and all the outreach, the government should do what it's been tasked to do and is able to do.
Secretary of State Rubio in that meeting yesterday said your client is a citizen of El Salvador and that's who should be dealing with him. Is there any thought of pivoting your legal strategy to deal with that country instead of the U.S. administration? Is that something, a reality you might have to face at some point?
I should hope not, given that this country has a strong relationship with the country of El Salvador. We have some contractual agreements with CCOT, the prison he's being held in. I think that is a question for a much, much later time, and hopefully we'll never have to get there.
I also just want to ask you, on a human level, has his family, has anyone had contact with him since he was sent to El Salvador? Do you know how his health is? Do you know how his mental health is? Have you gotten anything?
I really wish my answer to this was different. The true answer is no.
Trump is this is a death threat. Really good creators on other platforms, on this one and others, have said, effectively, Trump wants to make it so that he can send anyone, eventually also the homegrowns, which means I can only interpret as American citizen, people born in the United States, people who are grown in the home of the United States, and because the United States has birthright citizenship, however much Trump wants to argue otherwise, the homegrowns can be sent away. And if you can be sent away to a prison without ever getting out, because these people in some cases are locked away without any actual sentence, and you can't be gotten out even by the United States government after a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling, which includes even the nut bars justices knowing this has gone too far, then effectively Trump can give you a death sentence. He can disappear you for life without any due process. So far, it's only happened to non-citizens. But watch, it's going to eventually happen to someone with a green card. And then it's going to eventually happen to some other kind of person that's here legally but isn't a citizen. And before you know it, a citizen will be sentenced informally, like not sentenced through law and order and due process, but sentenced through Trump court to die in an El Salvadorian prison. And once they're in there, there will be no way to get them out. At least not until a new president comes in, and hopefully they work to get them out. And El Salvador listens. What if El Salvador doesn't send them back? The United States will have to invade? This is why you don't lock people up in foreign prisons. And this is why police, law enforcement, everybody are horrified right now about what Trump is planning to do.